If your surname is on this list, you didn't just grow up in Appalachia. Your family lived through one of the real, documented conflicts that shaped these mountains. And today, we're finally covering the names you've been asking us about for weeks. After our last two Appalachian videos, hundreds of you left comments asking us to research specific surnames we hadn't covered yet. Some of you tagged your own family name directly, some of you told us stories going back to the 1600s, and one of you even wrote out 4 generations of your own family history in the comment section, complete with land grants, war service, and a Confederate mess cook who became a Texas cattle baron. We read every single one. So today, we're doing something different. 17 surnames, pulled straight from your comments, mapped onto the real feuds, conflicts, and historical fault lines of Appalachia. Stay to the end, because one of these stories comes directly from a viewer who described his ancestor riding with Daniel Boone himself. And we're about to tell you exactly how deep that story goes. Before we start, if you commented on our last 2 videos asking about your surname, comment again right now and let me know if it made the list today. I want to see how many of you finally get an answer with this one. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this is exactly what this channel does. Real, documented history, built directly from what you tell us you want to know, not just whatever topic we think will perform well. One more thing. If you want to trace your own family story even deeper, I collaborated on a full book covering Irish surname origins, meanings, and ancestral jobs, since so many Appalachian families trace back through Ulster-Scots and Irish roots before they ever reached these mountains. Links in the description. Let's get into it. Appalachia's history isn't one feud, it's dozens of them, layered on top of each other across 2.5 centuries. Land disputes between the earliest frontier families competing for the same fertile valley bottoms. Civil War divisions that turned neighbor against neighbor in a region that was genuinely split down the middle between Union and Confederate loyalty. And courthouse rivalries that escalated into open violence. Once formal law enforcement proved too thin, too underfunded, and too far away to control an entire mountain county from a distant state capital. What makes this region different from almost anywhere else in the country is how personal all of it stayed. These weren't armies clashing in open fields hundreds of miles from home. They were families who knew each other, worshipped in the same churches, and sometimes married into each other's bloodlines, who ended up on opposite sides of a conflict anyway, because the terrain that made these mountains so hard to govern from the outside also made them almost impossible to keep unified from the inside. A ridgeline that separated 2 farms could just as easily separate 2 political loyalties, and once a war or a courthouse dispute forced people to actually choose sides, those old neighborly relationships often turned into exactly the kind of long-running hostility this channel keeps finding, county by county, name by name. Today's 17 surnames come directly from your comments on our last 2 videos. The names you told us weren't covered, the family stories you volunteered in incredible, sometimes multi-paragraph detail, and in a few cases, the surnames some of you specifically called out because we'd missed them the first time around, and you wanted to know why. We went back through every regional record we could find and mapped each one onto the real historical conflict tied to where that family actually settled, rather than just repeating names we'd already covered. Let's start the map. Surname number 17, LEFTWICH. LEFTWICH, requested directly in the comments alongside Manley and Reynolds by a viewer who simply asked us to look into Virginia families, traces into the Virginia Piedmont and Blue Ridge foothills. Territory that, during the Civil War, sat close enough to the fighting that LEFTWICH households would have felt the same divided loyalty pressure tearing through families across the wider Appalachian frontier, whether or not any single LEFTWICH ancestor ever picked up a rifle over it. Personally. Surname number 16, Manley. Manley, requested in the same comment as LEFTWICH and Reynolds, is concentrated in the same Virginia border region. Genealogical records from this area show families with all three surnames appearing repeatedly in the same county tax and militia rolls throughout the 1700s and 1800s, evidence that these weren't three unrelated requests, but three families who likely lived and possibly argued within a few miles of each other for generations. Surname number 15, Reynolds. Reynolds completes that same Virginia trio. If your surname is Reynolds and your family history runs through this exact border country, there's a real chance your ancestors crossed paths with LEFTWICH and Manly households more than once. At a courthouse, a church, or eventually, given how this region's history tends to go, somewhere less friendly than either. Surname number 14, Graham. Graham was requested directly by a viewer from Galax, Virginia, right in the heart of Grayson County, a stretch of the Blue Ridge border country that, like much of southwestern Virginia, was genuinely divided during the Civil War between Confederate loyalists and a significant Unionist population hiding in the same hills, sometimes just a ridge apart from their own relatives. Families with the Graham surname in this exact region lived through some of the most personally dangerous years in the entire area's history, when simply being known to favor the wrong side could mean a nighttime visit from armed men who used to be your neighbors, your hunting partners, or your children's godparents. Surname number 13, Blevins. We owe this one an apology. Blevins came up repeatedly across our last two videos, including one comment where a viewer told us flatly they didn't expect to see their name on our Killers and Feuds list. And we're right, because it wasn't there. A fact they pointed out to us directly and fairly with a bit of frustration. It's here now. Blevins is heavily concentrated across the exact Ashe County, North Carolina, and Grayson County, Virginia border country where Civil War-era guerrilla violence hit hardest, the same contested highland region that produced some of the worst neighbor-against-neighbor bloodshed anywhere in the mountains. As Unionist and Confederate sympathizers who'd grown up together, farmed the same hillsides, and in many cases were related by marriage, turned on one another once formal armies stopped being the only ones with guns and the war effectively went local. Multiple viewers with different last names described this exact stretch of border country as their own family's origin point, which tells us something important. Entire clusters of interconnected families settled these specific hollows together, stayed together for generations, and very likely lived through the same violent years side by side, whatever their individual surname happened to be. We're at the halfway point, and I want you to do two things. Comment the number closest to your own surname so far, and if yours still hasn't come up, tell me again, because we're clearly not done making these videos. Subscribe now if you haven't, because the back half of this list includes a feud we've researched in full before and a story one of you told us yourselves in the comments. Reminder too, if you want to trace the Irish or Ulster-Scots roots underneath your Appalachian surname, my book covers origins, meanings, and ancestral jobs, name by name. Links in the description. Let's keep going. Surname number 12, PROFFITT. PROFFITT, requested directly in the comments, is concentrated across East Tennessee and the surrounding Appalachian counties, territory that, like most of this region, was shaped by the same pattern of frontier land disputes and Civil War-era division running through nearly every name on this list. Surname number 11, GREGG. GREGG, another direct request, appears throughout the wider Appalachian settlement records without one single isolated feud attached to the name specifically. A reminder that most Appalachian families weren't necessarily central figures in the famous, named feuds, but still lived through the same underlying decades of frontier hardship and regional conflict that shaped everyone around them. Surname number 10, MCMINN. McMinn, requested by name in the comments, shares its name directly with McMinn County, Tennessee, named for an early Tennessee governor. And families carrying this surname in that exact county lived through the same East Tennessee Unionist-Confederate tension that split much of the region during the Civil War. Since East Tennessee, unlike the Deep South, leaned heavily toward the Union despite technically belonging to a Confederate state. Surname number 9, Webb. Webb, requested with the simple question, where did the Webb name come from, is widespread across Appalachia, with concentrations in exactly the counties most affected by both frontier-era land disputes and the later courthouse rivalries that defined feuds like the ones we've covered on this channel before. Surname number 8, Donald. Donald, requested directly, likely traces back to the broader wave of Scots-Irish and Scottish Highland settlement that populated much of Appalachia in the 1700s, the same migration pattern, rooted in clan structure and inherited loyalty, that historians point to as one of the cultural undercurrents feeding the region's later feuding tradition. Surname number 7, Sell. Sell, requested with a single-word comment, appears throughout Appalachian settlement records in smaller numbers than some of the more common names on this list, proof that even less common surnames were woven into the same regional patterns of land, family, and occasional conflict as their more famous neighbors. Surname number 6, Pelton. Pelton, requested by a viewer asking simply where the name came from, is less concentrated in Appalachia than most of the names on this list, suggesting families carrying it may represent a smaller, later arriving branch that settled into an already well-established regional network of older frontier families. Surname number 5, Cunningham. Cunningham, requested directly in the comments, is a name with deep roots in the Scots-Irish settlement of the Appalachian frontier, appearing across multiple counties tied to the region's broader 18th and 19th century land disputes and courthouse-era political rivalries. Only a few names left, and the last two are the ones I promised you at the start. Comment mapped below if you've made it this far, and subscribe now if you haven't, because the final two stories include a real documented feud and a viewer-submitted family history that goes back further than almost anything we've ever covered. Surname number 4, Prater. Prater, requested twice in the comments with viewers confirming to each other that they share the name and both grew up hearing it in the same general area, is concentrated across the eastern Kentucky counties that produce some of the deadliest documented feuds in Appalachian history. The same general territory as the Baker-Howard-White feud and the Turner-Howard feud we've covered on this channel before, meaning Prater families very likely lived through and possibly took sides in exactly this kind of generational conflict that defined the region for the better part of a century. Surname number 3, Lanning. Lanning, called out directly by a frustrated viewer who described the family serving in every American war starting with the Revolution and asked, pointedly, whether the name was being deliberately left out or was somehow top secret. Traces into the Carolinas with documented family branches connected to the eastern band of the Cherokee. Lanning families in this region lived through a different but equally real kind of conflict than a family feud. The land displacement and forced removal pressure that defined Cherokee and mixed heritage communities across the Carolinas throughout the 1800s, a period that scattered families like this one across multiple states and, according to the same viewer, eventually into Canada and Mexico as well. This history hasn't gotten the depth it deserves on this channel yet, and we're planning a full future video specifically on Cherokee-adjacent Appalachian surnames to do it properly. Surname number 2, EVERSOLE. We've actually covered this one before, and multiple viewers asked us to bring it back, including one commenter who grew up in Confluence, Kentucky, and remembered knowing several EVERSOLE families personally, and another who specifically asked about the Eversole/Ebersole lineage, correctly pointing out the name's older Germanic spelling before it anglicized. Eversole ties directly to the French Eversole feud, one of the deadliest documented conflicts in Kentucky history, centered in Perry County in the 1880s and 1890s. Joseph C. Eversole, a lawyer and merchant, built a rival economic and political network to Benjamin French's, and the resulting feud ended with Eversole's own assassination on the streets of Hazard in 1888. A killing widely believed to have been ordered by French, though no one was ever definitively convicted. If your surname is Eversole, you carry a name tied to one of the most thoroughly documented feuds in this entire region's history, And based on how many of you brought it up unprompted, clearly one that still means something to the families who carry it today. Surname number 1, Bogs. We end with a story one of you told us yourselves, in more detail than we could have found in any archive on our own. A viewer named Sam Boggs left one of the most detailed family histories we've ever received in a comment section, describing his ancestor Jimmy Boggs, born in 1752, who followed Daniel Boone through the Cumberland Gap, helped defend Boonesboro as a documented hero of the settlement's founding, and was rewarded with a 600-acre land grant in Madison County for his role in establishing and defending it. Jimmy Boggs reportedly fathered at least 15 known children, and during the era of the Louisiana Purchase, that family split 3 ways. One branch heading north across the Ohio River into southern Ohio, one moving west into Missouri, and one heading south into Arkansas, settling there sometime between 1816 and 1820. The Arkansas branch alone is its own small epic. A great-great-grandson born in Fort Smith around 1850 was forcibly inducted into a Confederate militia as a young teenager, serving as a mess cook and secondary reserve, a common fate for boys his age caught in a war they hadn't chosen. He survived it, moved to Fort Griffin, Texas by 1866, and became a noted buffalo hunter and rancher, eventually running one of the largest cattle herds of the early cattle drive era as a wagon master overseeing his own chuck wagon operation. That's not a story we found in a history book. That's a story a Boggs descendant volunteered to us directly, unprompted, in a comment section. 5 generations, 4 states, a Revolutionary War-era land grant earned defending one of Kentucky's first settlements, and a Confederate mess cook who grew up to be a Texas cattle baron, all connected to one surname and one comment. If your name is Boggs, or if this story sounds anything like your own family's, we want to hear it, because this is exactly the kind of history this channel exists to find. And it's proof that some of the best research we do doesn't come from an archive at all. It comes from you. 17 surnames, all pulled directly from what you told us in the comments. Some tied to documented feuds, some to the broader currents of Civil War division and frontier settlement that shaped this entire region. And one straight from a family history one of you was generous enough to share with all of us in more detail than most professional genealogists manage. That's the real point of today's video. This channel doesn't just research the famous names, it listens to the comment section, and when enough of you ask about the same surname or volunteer a story that good, we go find out what we can. If you commented before and finally got your answer today, let us know below. If you're still waiting, tell us again, because we're clearly making more of these. This is turning into an ongoing series, not a one-off. Subscribe if you're not already, like this video if your name or your neighbors finally showed up, and if you want to trace your family's story even further back, my book is linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next one.